We are super stoked that you are able to join us this afternoon. My name is Jessica Riestra. I am the youth organizer with CFILC, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a Latinx brown woman with dark brunette hair. I have brown eyes. I also have a pink comfortable shirt on, and I have a blue and white Mia Mingus background behind me. Next. Before we begin our event, let's talk about some of the accessibility basics. First, there's a caption section in the Zoom toolbar. You click CC, the closed caption button, and select show subtitles in order to be able to see the captions. For stream text, the link will be in the chat to follow along with captions on stream text. Thirdly, we have an ASL interpreter that is here with us throughout the event. So if you have any questions or anything, we would be more than gladly to help you out. With that in mind, at the end, we will have a 15-minute Q&A session. So if you have any questions for Mia Mingus, please send them in the Q&A chat. Please use the raise hand function if it is more accessible, and we will unmute you to ask any questions. Within the chat, please let us know if you need any technical support, and we would gladly help you figure it out. With that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the Disabled Voices of Color series. To begin with, this is a monthly installment that will be happening for the rest of the year. And this is our very first one for the beginning of the year. So I'm very excited to see how this first one goes. Beyond that, we invite disability activists to speak about their advocacy within the community and how the youth can be involved. More so, you also want to talk about some of the things our Yo Disabled and Proud team are currently working on. For one of the things we are working on is a Disability Belongs podcast. Please follow our Disability Belongs podcast on Instagram, which is also provided within the chat. We interview a lot of different people talking about education, about social issues, and so on. And we will be providing a few new updates within the next few weeks. So I'm very excited to see how that goes along. Now let's talk about our guest speaker today, Miss Mia Mingus. Mia is a writer, educator, and trainer for transformative justice and disability justice. Mia founded Soyo, which is a transformative justice program that builds Soyo for transformative justice to grow and thrive. Mia's also been involved in transformative justice work for almost 2 decades. Mia has helped create and forward disability justice framework. Mia's coined language and concepts such as access intimacy, magnificence, politically and descriptively disabled, and able supremacy. Mia's writing can also be found in her blog, Leaving Evidence. Also, please follow me on her social media handles, which are also provided within the chat. However, before we also begin, it's important to be able to thank everyone that has participated in this event and has helped make this event successful. With that, we want to thank our amazing people who are both on screen and behind the scenes, our mentors from CFILC for sharing their wisdom and expertise assisting with this event. Our guest, Mia Mingus, for taking time out of her busy day to speak to us about her life as an advocate, her wisdom as an organizer, and how we can help carry out her message. Finally, towards our amazing ASL interpreter and captioner for providing access needs to you. Thirdly, we want to talk about our next guest speaker, which would be Ryan Easterly, who will be participating in our second Disabled Voices of Color series, which will take part on Thursday, February 24th at 3 p.m. Pacific time. The registration link is there, but it also is on the chat. So if you want to register for this event, please do so. It's very exciting to see all of our different guests and know more about the wisdom and knowledge that they carry. We also have our social media. So if you want to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, those will also be provided within the chat. You will be able to see everything that we are doing, any future projects, new things that are brought upon us. And it's very exciting because we are constantly growing and constantly changing. So it's very exciting to see everything, and we're putting everything out on our social media handles. Before we officiate our interview with Ms. Mia Mingus, I also want to inform everyone that we would have Karena, who is our program manager, assisting me with the Q&A questions. With that in mind, let's begin the interview and have Ms. Mia be on screen. All right.
Hi.
Hello. Before we begin our questions, I would like for you to be able to talk a little bit about yourself so everyone can know who you are and so on. So yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mia Mingus, and my pronouns are she and her. And I am a Korean woman who have black glasses on with large silver hoops, and I'm wearing a dark blue or a navy blue disability visibility shirt that says unapologetically disabled. And I'm sitting in a black office chair with, unfortunately, just a plain white wall behind me. I really want to make it a little bit more special at some point. A little bit about me is I have been doing disability justice and transformative justice work for a long time. I was lucky enough to be part of, creating and founding the disability justice framework and forwarding it along with other folks as well. And so I feel really honored to have been part of that. And because of that, I've been engaged in a lot of disability justice work. I've also done a lot of transformative justice work as well. I am tuning in to you all from Georgia on Muskogee Creek lands. And yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I hope that that's enough. I can share more.
For sure. I just wanted people to know, in case if they didn't not know who you are, to be able to get a little brief understanding of a little bit about your background before we begin a little bit of our interview process, because some of these questions that I'm gonna ask are very deep and raw when it comes towards delving into these important discussions that are partaking in our daily occurrences, which I think are very important towards being able to discuss, which leads towards my very first question, that within recent discussions that we have had, at least that I've participated in, we have addressed social issues and how they are intersectional with one another. Additionally, we have addressed the importance of incorporating disability justice within the dialogue of disability rights. Based on the work that you have done, what do you feel is the difference between disability rights and disability justice?
That is a very good question, and is also a very meaty question, or a very tofu-y question for those of you who don't eat meat. I could spend hours talking about it. So just some highlights that I'll pull out. So first and foremost, disability justice tends to be, or is, I should say, multi-issue. It is intersectional, meaning that it is talking about more issues than only disability, than only ableism. It's not that those are backseat issues at all. They are still front and center, but we also acknowledge how they intersect with and are interdependent with things like race and white supremacy or queerness, trans issues, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, sexism, patriarchy, capitalism, so many different forms of oppression as well as violence. And then also, I would add that some of the differences just literally are that the disability rights movement in a more formal way, obviously, has been going on for a lot longer, but also disability justice work has always been happening. It may not have had a word before or a term before, but it's always been happening. But disability rights has tended to be more white-led and white-centered, even though, of course, there are many BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, disabled people who have been part of the disability rights movement. They oftentimes were not given the power. They were not given positions to make decisions, things like that. They were not put in positions of power. And it has been very heavily white-dominated, the disability rights movement. And disability rights tends to be more single issue focused, just disability, just ableism. Another big difference is that the disability rights movement has done a lot of work around policy and changing laws and things like that, whereas a lot of disability justice work has tended to be more grassroots, taken the form of cultural work as well. Oftentimes, I think with the majority of disability justice work, I would say it's not necessarily in a nonprofit either. It's oftentimes in the community. And then I would also add that there are a ton of people who in my mind, I would say that they are doing disability justice work, but who are not necessarily part of the formal disability rights kind of disability communities. So people who are doing work with folks who are in prison, for example, a huge number of which have disabilities, people who are doing work around folks who are homeless and houseless peoples, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a lot of differences. And I think the last thing I'll say is that disability justice to me, because it is intersectional and multi-issue, disability justice is not only fighting for justice for disabled people, like queer and trans disabled people of color, for example. We're also talking about what does justice and liberation look like for queer and trans people of color and their communities. So it is much more expansive in my mind.
Wow, I feel that. Also, honestly, being a queer woman of color who has a hidden disability, oftentimes I agree, it's hard feeling like you're part of the conversation when you don't partake in that sense of addressing issues that specifically affect you. So I hear that that reaches my soul when it comes towards that dialogue, and it goes very well with my second question, which is in an interview, you discuss how disability justice is a multi-issue politic, which you express also here. How have you seen intersectional issues such as the work you do to address child sexual abuse connect to the disability rights movement?
So I haven't seen that much intersectional work around connecting disability and child sexual abuse explicitly. I'm sure that people have done work, but in terms of any formal big initiative or what have you, I haven't seen it, me myself. But of course, that doesn't mean that it is not intersectional, and that, or I should say rather, of course, that doesn't mean that child sexual abuse is not connected to disability, because it absolutely is. And actually, all forms of sexual violence are deeply connected to disability. And I would add actually all forms of intimate and sexual violence, like domestic violence, etc., intimate partner abuse, So whether we're talking about abuse that's physical, whether we're talking about sexual abuse, disabled people, disabled children and adults in any study you look at across the board are anywhere from 2, I've even seen it as high as 4 times as likely to be survivors and or victims of intimate forms of abuse. So I personally feel that I don't think that there's any way to move towards gender justice or to move towards a world where we don't have abuse or where sexual violence doesn't exist without disabled people. And I don't understand why those issues are not more front and like at the forefront of disability work, period. In the same way that I don't understand why abolition work isn't at the forefront of all disability work, because it's so bound up in the history of disabled people and the history of like the way that incarceration and institutionalization are so deeply interconnected and enmeshed with each other. Sometimes it's hard to even, they're inseparable. It's impossible to even tell them apart. Whether we're talking about a group home, whether we're talking about a psych ward, whether we're talking about a jail or prison, and sometimes it's both again, right? There are so many issues that I feel like are so deeply connected to disability that on both sides, right? The ableism in terms of those movements, not including disabled people, disabled voices, and similarly to what we were talking about, Jessica, in terms of the disability rights movement, only not including them in a way that's just tokenizing, but like actually putting them in positions of leadership, giving them decision-making power, all of that. But then also on the other side, in disability work, having it be not having multi-issues be allowed to be understood, only talking about this very narrow set of issues like budget cuts, disability or ableism, like access, which of course those things are definitely important, but there's so much more and there's so much more richness, I think. And for a lot of us, like as a queer disabled woman of color who is also a survivor, being in disability, like more kind of disability spaces that lean more towards disability rights understanding, and trying to talk about sexuality and queerness, for example, or trying to talk about white privilege with white disabled people and then being like totally silenced or shut down, or like, we're not talking about that. Disability is the only thing that matters. And as many of us know who live at the intersection of multiple oppressed identities, it's not that disability doesn't matter, but it's not the only thing. It's not the only thing at all, because all of these things shape our lives. So again, I just want to be really clear, like I may not know of any disability work around child sexual abuse explicitly. It doesn't mean that it's not happening, but I haven't heard of like more formalized work. But I hope that we have more of that, because I think there's so many connections, and I could talk for like 5 hours about the connections. I won't do that here though.
Honestly, I would be more than like willing to hear you talk more than 5 hours, because for me, it means a lot. Like this is like a lot of conversation that like I bring along, because a lot of people like fit so many different categories and fit so many different groups that oftentimes like that is not heard or addressed in like the way that it should. So sometimes it feels like, at least speaking from my personal experience, that like I silence certain parts of who I am just because I fit certain groups, that I'm not able to encapsulate like who makes Jessica like who she is. So like being able to have that open dialogue is something that I appreciate. And I'm honestly very excited that you're here, because it means a lot. It truly does.
Well, and I think too, Jessica, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. But I was going to say, I think everything that you just said is so common for so many of us. We have felt that as well. And I think that is important for people who are doing work in disability to understand that you are it is your own people. You say that you care about disabled people. Well, then that means that you should care about queerness. You should care about talking about race. You should care about talking about sexism, misogyny, and there are non-binary disabled people. There are, I mean, trans and two-spirit, like intersex. There's so disabled people are not only disabled. And I think that is one of the things that separates disability justice from disability rights, is that disability justice really acknowledges that disabled people are humans and come in all different forms of complexities. And that oftentimes those identities, like being, you know, a BIPOC person, right? That oftentimes, because of the way that white supremacy plays out in our society, that oftentimes it is because of white supremacy that people then oftentimes become disabled, if that makes sense. And so there's so many connections and there's so much, again, so much richness that I don't understand. I don't understand how there are still folks, predominantly white disabled people, who are so resistant to understanding that and talking about all those intersections and complexities.
Whew, my heart is pounding because like I am feeling it. So going on to another question, which like you kind of briefly touched, which is regarding ableism. Ableism has been an issue that is oftentimes not discussed as much as it should be. Throughout these past 2 years, this pandemic has affected every person in the country in more than one way. When bringing attention to disproportionately impacted communities, what do you feel justice and liberation means for them? In addition, what does justice and liberation mean for you?
So like I said, I think justice and liberation means not only that they have justice, those communities, but it's also for their communities as well, right? So taking myself as an example, what it would mean for Mia to have justice and liberation through through a disability justice understanding and lens is that it wouldn't just be that ableism or able supremacy is ended. It would also mean that white supremacy is ended. It would also mean that we do away with capitalism and US imperialism and rape culture and a paternalistic culture where we oppress children. So many things would have to happen. So that's part of it. I think in specific terms to this pandemic, there's, again, so many things as well that are both systemic, right? That have to be changes made on a systemic level as well as individual and community levels. Things like folks who are working now being able to have hazard pay, that the government is able to pay people to stay home. So many things like that, as well as not just the like material pieces, right? Like hazard pay, people being able to get paid to stay home, people not having to be forced to choose between making a livelihood or their literal survival, like their health. But also things like dignity and belonging and respecting and honoring people in their different cultures and backgrounds and where they come from. And then on the individual and community level, it's things like protecting those who are the most vulnerable. And they oftentimes are in those oppressed communities as well. For me, I think justice and liberation also would mean that in addition to the things that I've already mentioned, I also feel like, one of the biggest pieces of justice and liberation that I think of is that we have the individual and collective capacity for things like repair between each other when things go awry, as they will, like conflict, mistakes, harm even will happen, that we have the capacity for things like repair, accountability, healing, the rebuilding of trust, like this idea that we can come back to each other, that we can return to each other. I think I think one of the things that is so devastating and so painful is when we don't have those capacities and when we have the breaking of relationships. And I think all of us probably have experienced in some way, shape, or form a form of heartbreak around that, no matter who it is, whether it was our family that we weren't able to repair with, whether it was our friends, whether it's the heartbreak of the movement, of being in the movement and having, whether it's an organization you really believed in or you believed in, oh, I'm in the movement now. We all love each other and are super kind to each other. And then that doesn't happen. I think about things like that. And to me, that's really where transformative justice comes into play. That transformative justice, so much about that work is about having the, what am I trying to say? It's about building the capacities so that we can respond to harm and violence, obviously, but even things like conflict and hurt, and that we can ideally also prevent harm and violence. I think when we talk about transformative justice and healing or accountability, we immediately think of the worst forms of violence. But I want to remind us that we have a long way to go, because most of us don't even know how to tell our friends that they hurt our feelings, right? Like we don't know how to apologize well. And even for conflict or hurt, not even getting into harm. So that would be part of how I would think about justice and liberation, in addition to, capitalism being ended, like no more wars, people caring about each other. What a concept. Yeah.
All this, honestly hits really, deep, towards me. And I think it also connects towards my next question, which goes deeper into your blog. Which I must say, before I begin with that question, anyone that hasn't read Mia's blogs, they're awesome. I am not kidding. Your most recent blog brought me to tears because it was so raw, authentic. It was, for me, really great to be able to hear, because I just felt like this is me, this story here, it's my story being told. And within that, you brought in some discussion about how are we able to move forward, what we could be able to do. And I really want to delve a little bit deeper into that, which goes into that in your blog. You mentioned that the way for systematic change is interdependence. How would you define interdependence? Moreover, why is it important for one to acknowledge interdependence when discussing disability justice?
Again, how long do you have? These are excellent questions and I love them. And I feel like I could write a book on every single one of them. I do think interdependence is the way forward, period. I think that if we don't get good at practicing interdependence, valuing it, embracing it, we will not be able to, and I don't mean this in a dramatic way, I mean this literally, we will not be able to survive. Aren't you glad you came to this webinar and presentation? I'm just a ray of sunshine, aren't I? But literally, I mean, thinking about the climate crisis in particular, if we don't understand deeply that we are interdependent with the planet, our species is not going to be able to survive. The earth will take care of itself. It is very resilient, but we may not be around. And so we have to really start understanding interdependence. When I think of interdependence, I think of it as being beyond just we are interconnected. I think that interdependence really is a intentional thing that we do together, that we are interconnected, but that interdependence is hopefully a choice that we are making with each other. And that is to say that we acknowledge that what I do impacts you, Jessica, that we are not alone, and that because of that interconnectedness, we have to be aware and take care of each other, and be aware of how we are impacting each other. when I think about interdependence and disability, period, but disability justice, I have another blog that I wrote about this that people are welcome to read. It is also long. But one of the things that I think that is really important to understand when we talk about interdependence and disability justice is that disabled people and disability, by its very nature, I think it is a very unique experience because we have body minds that need. I think that many other forms of, many other identities or politicized experiences, right? Like, I don't know, being poor or being a person of color, being queer, whatever it may be. I think there's this idea that it's like there are these normal people and then these terrible things happen to them, right? Like, so if you think about poverty, for example, it's like they're regular, normal people, and it's just the poverty that's impacting them. But I think disability is so different because it is part of us oftentimes. And there is, especially those of us who were born with our disabilities and or who acquired them as babies, for example, there is a different understanding I think we need to get to when we think about what liberation looks like for disabled people, because it means that we have to embrace need, and then we have to understand how that need is an opportunity. It's not a burden. It's not an obligation. It's not a tragedy. Obviously, it gets framed as such inside of a capitalist system, right? A capitalist ableist system, but that actually need is an opportunity for generative things. Anyway, so interdependence to me is about harnessing the power and the opportunity around addressing and responding to that need. That we can respond to that need with inaccessibility, by all the things that our society does now: inaccessibility, isolation, shame, right, humiliation, all of these things. Or we can respond to it in ways that are like access intimacy, for example, right? In ways that are generative, that are like access is an opportunity for us to get closer to the world that we ultimately want to have. And that body minds that need or that are interdependent with each other are not bad things, that they are actually, there is a power and an opportunity inside of that is transformative if we would only harness it and like honor it.
Whew. Preach. I am like all feeling everything. Following on that, like you mentioned a lot about like obviously like this capitalist society that we live in has created such a stigma of like how we are as people, like how we should view ourselves, like how people view us, like it's something that's very well kind of like installed into like our systematic. I think this goes into the systematic oppression that goes into like this bigger thing, like that, like stuff from education towards multiple things that like I think we need to get more educated on to get a better understanding of one another. Which kind of leads towards my next question, which is in your own words, like how would you define equity and equality? For me, like that's a big one, because like so many people talk about like let's move forward into like providing equality for everyone, but for me it's like y'all do realize that we don't all start in the same page. Like some of us, like I come from like poverty, like a lifestyle where like I grew up with immigrant parents, like all my family's undocumented, like just myself comparing myself towards like another Latino person who was born here. Is like our stories are very much different. So like we cannot talk much about equality if we don't talk about the equity process. So mine goes deeper into that. And how would you define equity and equality? And going into that, can they be interchangeable, and can one occur without the other?
This is a great question. So when I think of equity, I think of things like, fairness and impartiality, things like that. When I think of equality, right, it's kind of like what you said, Jessica, like just everybody gets the same thing. And I really prefer, instead of equity, I prefer justice, because to me, justice takes into account and acknowledges power, privilege, and access. Um, so, but having said that, though, like, no, they're not interchangeable. And I think the best example of this is this pandemic. Actually, we can talk about many examples from the pandemic. One more recent example that we can talk about is the every household gets 4 at-home tests. And that is equality, right? That's like everybody gets the same. But now, if we talk about equity or justice, what we then reveal and uncover is that many people, especially like I think about a lot of immigrant households, I think about a lot of poor and working class folks in particular. I think about a lot of folks generally who are from maybe different cultural backgrounds as well, have many more people than just like 4 people that live in their household. And so what are they supposed to do if everybody shares the same address and let's say there's 9 people living in that one house, and let's say that that's multiple families living together in one house? What are they supposed to do with just 4 at-home tests? How are they supposed to get distributed? I think about the impact that has on houseless folks who don't have an address as well. But this whole pandemic, though, has been an example of the differences between equity or justice and equality, because I know that many people have said this, like, oh, we're all in the same boat in this pandemic. And it's not true. Like, we're all in the same storm, right? Some of us are in yachts riding out this storm. Some of us are on a raft with a paddle. Some of us don't even have a raft. We are just swimming in the sea, like, and then everything in between. And so I think when we think about this, is why equality does not work, because it does not take into consideration difference. And if we don't know how to embrace and understand and acknowledge difference, there will never be any justice. So yes, I think that you cannot have, when you ask if one can occur without the other, I think that justice can happen without equality. Like, I don't think we all have to be the same or have the same things to have justice. I think justice and equity, in my mind, understand we all need different things, and that's okay. I mean, isn't this disability too? Like, can you imagine if I was like, we're all going to be equal and everybody's going to get a wheelchair, and that's it. That's the equal access that everybody's going to get. It doesn't matter if you're hard of hearing or deaf. It doesn't matter if you're blind it wouldn't make any sense. The whole point is that we all need different things to be able to fully participate or live with dignity, whatever it is. And that's okay. That difference doesn't have to be a bad thing.
For sure. Our last question before going into the Q&A, because I'm sure people would have like quite a few questions. My question to you would be, we have discussed a lot about like the importance of addressing like these issues and what they mean and like what they signify towards us and so on, because like for me, I could talk a lot about this just as much, because it's something that like impacts my family and it impacts me on a daily basis. However, something that I also deeply value is the importance of like mental health and being able to take care of yourself and so on. I feel that oftentimes like as activists and like people that are like trying to bring this conversation in, we don't take as much care of us as we should. So like my question would be like, what are ways that you like do self-care, and what has been helpful to you? Like, I'm sure that like a lot of people sometimes have it hard and like feel that like things can be a little bit tough at times, but it's like, it's kind of like being able also to take time away and knowing to like, sometimes we need to take a step back and focus on us, because if we're not like safe, or just more so like taking care of ourselves, like physically, like up here, mentally, and so on, we won't be able to help support other folks.
Yes, many of us don't practice. We don't care for ourselves as well as we probably should. Some of the things that have been helpful to me, one is rest. And I know that sounds so simple, but do you understand how many of us like feel incredibly guilty or to rest, or we don't allow ourselves to rest? Just rest. Like, listen, I was in a every time something like really huge happens to me, like I was in a very terrible car accident a bunch of years back. I'm still recovering from 2 back-to-back medical emergencies that unexpectedly happened last year. Every time those things happen, I'm like, right, like, because I'm forced to rest and work just stops. So I just keep remembering those moments where whenever I feel like I want to rest and I feel guilty about it, I'm like, just remember, like the world went on when those things happened, and you don't need like an emergency to rest. It's okay. So that's one. I also find that, I mean, some of this stuff sounds so cheesy, but like, like cultivating peace in my life. And what sometimes that means like taking a little bit of a break from social media, maybe if that's causing me a lot of anxiety. And obviously like balancing that, because I know for a lot of us, that is part of our social world. But like balancing it. It also looks like, honoring my feelings and investing in my own healing, which is hard to do, but I think it's really important. And also like in that cultivating peace, cultivating joy and happiness, like doing what really brings you so much joy, like whether it's just like whatever it is, maybe you have 10,000 plants. Great. And like you love all your house plants. Maybe it's sitting and being with your support animal, whatever it is, do that. Maybe it's painting your nails, or who the hell knows, right? Enjoy that though. And like really cultivating that and making it a priority, because, I think a lot of us, we are so quick to treat other people 10 times better than we treat ourselves. And if we flip that, we can fill our cups first so that then we have more to give to other people. Did you ask me a second question around self-care?
Oh, that was pretty much it. Like, honestly, like, I think it's important for everyone to hear, because like I've also been in positions where I've been with a lot of activists, and everyone's always quick to help everyone out. But sometimes it's like, are you taking the time for yourself also to like be able to like give time of healing and so on? Because like some of these things can be emotionally damaging at times, like when like it specifically like touches our heart and so on, that like we don't take our time to heal. And for me, like that's something that's very big. And like when talking to young people, like when talking to adults and everyone, because I just want everyone to be like as comfortable, enjoy themselves, but also have like that heart and passion towards making change, because at the end of it, like this is how we move forward, and like how like we help support one another. Yeah. So I'll pass it now to Karana to ask the Q&A questions.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for all of the questions and the chat feedback that have been going throughout this conversation. We're just going to start off with a sort of an interesting one from an anonymous individual. How can we make the push from disability rights to disability justice, especially in spaces where people of power do not see the importance?
This is an excellent question. Again, I could write a book on this. I would say if people in power don't see the importance, to me, this is just good old fashioned organizing, and it will take time. Don't expect it to happen overnight, but start small, right? So it can either be starting small in terms of introducing some of the different concepts around disability justice to whether it's an organization maybe that you're talking about, or a school, or what have you. But I also think that while you can absolutely do that, I also think you can also start finding people who are more aligned and building that alignment together, building that seed and that kind of spark, and that will continue to grow and grow and grow, and can help to push forward things so that you're not only by yourself, because it's incredibly hard to do by yourself. I know way too many organizers and activists who are for example, they get into an organization and they're like, I'm going to change this whole organization. And then within a year and a half, they're completely burned out because it's really hard work to do by yourself. So that's what I would say, as a suggestion. And you can do both of those things at the same time. You don't have to pick one or the other. And if you also want to find support from other people who might be in a similar position, they might be working in a different context, maybe they're working at a school and you're in an organization, maybe they're working in their church or their congregation and you're in it, right? That's okay. And social media can be a great place to find those types of people. Listen, disability Twitter is so fun. And I don't know how many people here are on Twitter, but that's a great place also to find some folks too.
All right, more are rolling in as we go. Let's go with actually one for kind of both of you, since this kind of goes into what CFILC does as well. From Emma Martin, do you think that the independent living movement can, or even should, be incorporating disability justice principles into their work? Do you worry about the co-optation / watering down of disability justice? Not that we want to gatekeep disability justice, but it's something that she thinks about a lot.
Jessica, do you want to?
Sure. I can start in saying yes. I think that is something that can definitely be brought. Just a quick discussion on something that I've been. This past Wednesday, I was in a meeting with some different folks from independent living centers in California, and many discussed how we could bring in awareness about disability justice and how do we bring it along. I honestly feel it's going to take all of us to be able to kind of put this as an important topic. I know that many people find it very important, but something that I've seen is that sometimes one person might be addressing an issue, but if it's not being addressed by other folks within the center or so on, it's could easily not get heard of because not enough people are coming together towards being able to say hey, this is something that's crucial and it's important, something that we need to discuss. So when it comes to being able to put it, I think it's important for us, everyone that is supportive of disability rights, everyone that is part of ILCs, towards really bring it upon themselves why this is crucial, why they need to take a stance in favor of it. And if we're able to come together and bring these issues towards our executive directors and so on, we're slowly going to start bringing that change so we could start implementing that on a statewide scale. I truly do believe it. I'm already rallying up folks and being able to discuss hey, y'all, this is something that we need to change. But I know it's going to take all of us coming together towards expressing the importance of why this needs to be brought upon so we could start creating that sense of change. And I'll pass it to Mia.
I love that answer, Jessica. And yeah, I also think that it absolutely can. When you talk about the co-opting of DJ, absolutely that's a concern. And of course we don't want to be gatekeepers, but I also feel there's nothing wrong with trying to practice harm reduction, like reducing harm. There's nothing wrong with incorporating some of the broader concepts. But I will say, though, I think there have to be some structural changes, though, made if they're going to fully embrace disability justice, like the leadership should be, people from oppressed, marginalized communities, ideally BIPOC people. I saw in the chat a comment about Native American folks, right? Hopefully because then it moves it from just being, it can't just be in word, it has to also be in actions too. They have to be practicing disability justice. And at the core of disability justice, a lot of that is about relinquishing power and using your privilege to redistribute power in ways that it has not traditionally been. So if, for example, if there's an independent living center who's yeah, we're disability justice, but everybody is white in it, including the leadership, I'm sorry, friend, that's not DJ. So there needs, and it's not only people of color, I'm using those as examples, but it is, right? We have to push back against the white dominated history of disability and the whitewashedness of disability as well. But the last thing I'll just say, though, is that I think that part of it too is that hopefully it should necessarily shift and change the independent living movement in and of itself, right? That it should, embracing these other principles or values or concepts should mean that it is also not the same work. So it's not the case that we just want to keep the same work, the same structure. We just want to plug people of color into it. That's not what we're talking about either. It should necessarily shift the work and the concepts, ideas, everything.
Before you go, Corinna, and asking the following question, I just want to remind folks, it is 3:54, so we'll have about for one or two more questions. I know that we got a lot of questions here, which is really cool. Please know that we won't be able to answer all of them right now, just due to time. However, what we can be able to do is that we'll put it down on a paper and then we'll try to answer it and then send it back to you, just to make sure that your questions are being answered. So yeah, I just wanted to state that because I know that a lot of people ask questions and I wish all of your questions can be answered right now. But unfortunately, due to time, we can't at this moment, but we'll try to do everything to accommodate. And I'll pass it back to you, Corinna.
My Thor says, how do we use the framework that you developed to incorporate a disability justice movement into our own respective communities?
Ooh, get creative with it. Yes. I mean, one right now, which is really exciting. So back in 2005, when I first started, when disability justice first started to really, as a term, that is, obviously the work has been going on forever. There weren't nearly as many people doing disability justice work. And now we have so many resources, writings, videos. I mean, like I said, disability Twitter, we have people on Instagram. It's just such a much larger community. So get creative, whether that means reading things together, having conversations together, finding other people inside of your community. Again, similar to the first question, just good old fashioned organizing, finding other folks, being let's create something, let's build something together, whether that's making a zine or who knows what it is, right? Practicing mutual aid and helping out disabled folks in your community, for example. There's so many different things. And I feel so excited for you and whatever you end up doing. I also feel for yourself and anybody else, I know people who have done little, even if it's just 4 of you that you found, yes, we want to do something, maybe do a little reading group and find some other people who want to join you in that and talk. There's so many different, just many different creative options that you can do. And because honestly, the way that I started out doing this work, was that I just started to create what I wished that I had had when I was coming up as a disabled, politicized person, in particular, like as a teenager or a young adult. And so that's how I started. I didn't get like a degree in disability justice or any kind of thing like that. I was just like, let me just start writing things that I wished that I had had. And I was looking for other people who were doing it. And I was like, surely other people have done this, and I couldn't find anything. So I just started to create the world that I wanted. And I think that's probably the best advice.
All right. This is probably the best one to end on, Mia. Do you have plans to write a book?
Oh, who are you that asked me that question?
Ariel wants to know. Ariel's asking what all of us want to know. Do you have plans to write a book in the future? And thank you, as someone who also read your last blog post and wept. It was powerful and spoke for so many of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me. I don't have official plans right now, but I would like to. But I might need to find a little bit of funding or something to help support me, but I would like to. And yes, I don't know if I can do it though, you all. Can I do it? It just seems like such a large undertaking. I mean, even writing a blog post, I'm like, this is so much work, but I would love to write a book.
Love to read a book by you. Nietzsche says, hell yes, you can. We've got lots of support here. I know we'll all buy it.
Thank you.
Yes, like without a doubt, like I mentioned, like your words, like I tell people all the time, words have meaning, and your words truly transcend, especially like here, someone who fits multiple groups, like I can say that like it really touches my soul, and like I would be more than willing to hear you for like 18, 24 hours talk, and I'll be like, yes, towards everything. Like I'm feeling it and not feel sleepy. But yeah, we'll just end it there because we do have like about a minute. I'll state for everyone that wrote a question, please once again know that we'll try to answer it, not through here because we don't have time, but we'll make sure that like we answer maybe through an email or something, because I want to make sure that you are accommodated. Beyond that, I also really want to state that we do have a Survey Monkey, so if you're able to fill that out, we'll deeply appreciate that. Beyond that, I truly want to thank you, Mia, for being here. It truly means a lot. Like as mentioned, like I'm like here talking about my own personal story and so on, and like being able to like feel it in my core. And it's really something like that transcends. Like, and I feel especially that we're moving in a direction where we talk more about disability justice. This is going to impact so many different people, whether they're young, whether they're older, like it fits everyone's stories. I also want to thank our ASL interpreter for being here and like being here to support us, as well as our captioner. Please do know that we are very grateful for like all of you being here. And lastly, I want to thank every single person that joined in. Like it means a lot knowing that we have people joining us, like being able to like go deeper into like our message of change and being able to really incorporate disability justice into this disability rights realm. So yeah, thank you everyone. And it's like right at 4. Like thank you all for coming. We hope you're able to join us in our next event, which as I mentioned will be in February. So hope to see y'all soon.
Thank you.